Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with J.J. Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, J.J. Kitchen. The topic of the day, the ACC versus the Florida State in court still, but a revelation has come out. Within the ACC grant of rights, obviously, you could only go to the headquarters in Greensboro at the time to look at the ACC grant of rights. One of the things that just came out recently that talked about one of the ways that Florida State could really get out of the grant of rights is for them to buy back their own media rights. That is a major, major question. And what does that truly mean? Does that mean they stay together? What does that really affect with the other teams? Do other teams have the potential to buy back their rosters or their media rights? We'll be able to tell. But first, as we get into it here today, the first thing, Colonial Beer, sponsor of the show, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. Again, a great place run by Pitt men here in Bethel Park in Pennsylvania. A great place where there's plenty of selection when it comes to the great customer service they have on a day-to-day basis. They are truly the place to go. And more importantly, again, Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA, 15102. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be talking more about this as it goes on with other ACC teams, what this could mean for other ACC teams with the resolution of Florida State and the ACC battle, a potential issue in terms of renegotiations. Is there a negotiation to a buyout to where they don't have to buy back all of their media rights? That's the question. But the biggest thing today, one thing that we're going to take a look at right now, is this article that I found from the Tampa Bay Times, which I thought was really, really good, talking about what the current situation is and the current temperature of what this could look like. Right now, Florida State could buy back the TV rights from FSU football from the ACC. That's a great question, and they go into it here, and I think Matt Baker does a really good job. Buried in 40-plus pages of legalities, the ACC made in court filing Friday was a potential solution to the conference's weeks-long legal back and forth with Florida State. The Seminoles could buy back their TV rights from the conference. The ACC contends that, we go back up here, the ACC contends that it owns those rights through 2036. That's because the FSU signed a document called the Grant of Rights in 2016. FSU granted the rights to broadcast its home games to the ACC through 2036. The ACC sold them to ESPN and distributes the money back to FSU and its peers. Whether the deal is enforceable could ultimately decide by a judge in Leon County or Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. If it's ironclad, as the ACC argues, FSU estimates that it could risk losing up to $429 million in TV revenue. If FSU is correct, then the Seminoles could exit for free, which is massive on a scale of $430 million compared to nothing. I mean, that would be incredible. The ACC latest motion presents a third option. If Florida State wishes to regain control of the rights before the end of the term, it could attempt to repurchase them, the filing said. But having to buy back the right, which was assigned, is not a penalty. It is simply a commercial possibility. A commercial possibility that had not been raised previously in the dueling lawsuits. A price was not specific, but the likely of everything in this legal fight is subject to negotiation. The rest of the filing was a series of technical arguments, many focused on where this dispute could be heard in FSU's home venue, Leon County Circuit Court, or the ACC's home venue, Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The ACC filed its suit in North Carolina on December 21st. If we can get back up there. The day before, FSU sued the conference in Leon County. Friday's filing said North Carolina remains in the proper venue because it's where the conference is based and home first. The league and said Florida State was fumbling jurisdictional ball. Florida State alleges no facts in support of this bare-bones venue allegation for Tallahassee, the motion said. The conference reiterated how FSU has received millions of TV dollars without complaint. This is killing me. The facts cuts against the school's argument that those deals were rotten or broken, and according to the filing, means FSU can't challenge their validity. It also means North Carolina's 3-year statute of limitations is up. So as you can see, we'll stop there and we'll really go in to dive into it here. So as you can tell, first things first, Florida State versus the ACC. From there, you can see that there's now a battle to where they could buy back their rights from the ACC and ESPN, which is huge. Okay, and I think when you look at $430 million to potentially nothing, but now the third option is that they can buy them back. And I think that Florida State also later on in the article, without it having to disrupt everything, talks about how ESPN does have an option as well. ESPN's option for 2027 to 2036 is another case. But right now, this could really shape up to the point where the ACC could really dismember very quickly. Because if now Florida State is allowed to negotiate how much they're willing to pay in terms of what gets them out, whether it's $100 million or $200 million out of the $430 million. But I think what they're looking at right now is they're not looking to jump to that conclusion. Because if they can get out of this concrete ironclad deal with zero exit fees, that would truly mean the end of the ACC because of the legal limitations on this deal. I think right now, the ACC is in a little bit of a corner to where they're showing, hey, you know what, we're still willing to go to court. We're still here. We still believe it's ironclad. But if you want to get out, we can have a negotiation to where, hey, maybe you don't owe $430 million, but according to there, you could possibly owe $100 to $200 million, potentially $250. That kind of thing, when you look at it too, there's always been negotiations in college athletics, but more importantly, in terms of the finance aspect of it, I think it's really good, but also too, that's still a lot of money. Now, obviously, Florida State would need to go to a conference to where they're able to get media rights, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC. I think the SEC has made it clear that they don't want Florida State, but I think the Big Ten would take Florida State. So in that term, you could get $70 to $80 million for the next 5 years till 2030, 5-6 years. Overall, that could potentially help you pay off the big major debt that you have, unless they also have donors who come into support. They pay off a frontal payment to where it's a down payment just to get out, and then over time, whether it's over a 10-year period, they pay back a certain portion of that along with donors. That could potentially happen. But however that ends out, it leads to the second thing that really is the overwhelming aspect where the other ACC teams are really involved with watching what's going on. And that's the ESPN option for 2027 to 2036. ESPN has not executed that option yet. That is a very key major factor in this, that the grant of rights really proved over time that no one really knew, because you can only read it at the Greensboro headquarters. You could only see it there. I think so many attorneys were trying to look, and they were hearing from other attorneys what was going on with the grant of rights. But now the fact that that's out in open court that says, hey, ESPN is the only one that has the option to execute really the survival of the ACC from 2027 to 2036. Now, the majority of legal experts say, hey, more than likely, they're going to execute that. They're going to execute that, create that option, go from 2027 to 2036. But let's just play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say they don't. What does the ACC do in terms of teams? Where can they go? Do they stay together? Do they try to get another deal done? Is there something that they try to do and work with ESPN? That's a huge question. But I think a lot of people don't understand is, that's a major factor in terms of it's unsettling. Here we are in 2024. This is 3 years away, but you'll have to do this, before 3 years away. You'll have the 24 season, the 25 season, the 26 season. You'll probably know it's before the 26 season if they're gonna execute that option or not. And if they don't execute that option, you really don't. Your only options at this point are you go to another conference, which it looks like, I think the Big Ten would easily try to go after, the Virginia, North Carolina, Clemson. You would look at potentially Miami or Florida State, but also at the SEC could possibly want to get the new markets, wanting to add Virginia, North Carolina, potentially Miami, but obviously they already have that market in terms of what they have with Florida. Obviously, Florida does not want any other Florida universities in the SEC. That's been well known. Obviously too, Greg Sankey has talked about in the SEC that the pro rata clause would not allow them to access more money from a Florida team because of the markets that are already there. So that's a huge question mark. So I think when you look at this, when it comes to the ACC, this could go really multiple different directions. It's either the ACC wins this and then Florida State has to pay a huge buyout to try to leave, especially too, and nothing's really changed, or they buy out. A potential option is they buy out, they have a negotiation, they leave, potentially opening up other ACC schools to have those conversations, those negotiations. Or option three is they wait for the ESPN to not execute this option. The league falls apart, and then obviously you have the Big Ten, the SEC, and then the Big 12 come in and decide which teams they want to take. I think when you look at different teams in the ACC, what potentially could be an issue for some of them, you look at the Boston colleges of the world, Boston College, Syracuse, I think Wake Forest. Those are three schools just off the top of my head that I say, hey, there's a questionable mark. Is there any value in adding those teams? So I think when you look at those teams, they want the ACC to stay together. It's a power conference still. A lot of these things need to happen to see where it goes. But I think when you look at the unsettling part, I think the biggest option is at this point is ESPN having the option to extend this deal from 2027 to 2036 or completely just ends. That is a massive development from what they've talked about in court, which many people did not know. I think that'll have some schools on edge. I think that they're going to look for reassurances. They had their ACC meetings this week. They talked about how the leader of the leader of the committee is Wake Forest's AD. I think his name's John Curry. He talked about how the schools are together. Now, obviously, they're going to say that just out into the public, into the media, because they don't want to create any type of anxiety or whatnot. But I think when you add in these other schools like Cal, SMU, and Stanford, they want the league to stay together. Notre Dame wants the league to stay together because their sports, their non-revenue sports and basketball in the ACC, they have plenty of potential in there. If something would happen, I think obviously there would be a great spot for them in the Big Ten when it comes to their non-revenue sports and basketball. But I think with their traditional rivals and their traditional schedule, they want to stay in the ACC, which is why they have not left or paid that buyout, because their buyout is significantly less for them because, one, they're not entertained with football. So they could leave at any point, but they want to stay in the ACC because they like the institutions that are there. And they were a major factor, which, again, I don't agree with, but they were a major factor in getting Stanford, Cal, and SMU into there. More importantly, Stanford and Cal, because of the academic institutions that they are. So for me, I think it's less about really, people talking about Florida State versus the ACC. I think it's more about this ESPN option that is very unsettling for these schools. I think, Florida State wants to pay that money and go into a bunch of debt. That's on them. That's their fault. They can do whatever they want to do. And they want to test the waters, they can go ahead and do that. Or the independent route, they can go ahead and do that. But the one thing that is very for certain that's going to be watched for a while now is this ESPN option, because it affects everybody else. The ACC versus Florida State, whether, if they can get out for free, then it affects everybody. But there's a buyout, a negotiated buyout. I don't think these other schools are going to do that. One of the bigger brands like North Carolina is a massive brand in the ACC. I think Duke is a really great brand in the ACC. You've got Clemson, who's now built up their brand, but I don't think they're bigger than UNC. I think UNC has just the history of what they are. Same thing with Duke with basketball. I think they have that history with them. Obviously, Miami with the U, that's another big brand. You look at these brands, I think they'll wait and see for this 2027 to 2036 because they don't want to spend those millions of dollars, even if it's a $250 million buyout, less than 430. That is still a massive amount of numbers for these college institutions, and it's not easy to pay it. You go into massive debt, and potentially it could sink you. They could easily wait for the 2027 option to end up, and then you're out, and you don't have to pay anything. So I think this is the major factor that we found out in court. For me, this is what I'm going to be watching because, one, it's a factor to the point where ESPN has not executed it yet. That is a major factor, and it's very enticing to see where it goes from here in terms of how this is going to affect every other school. Especially, too, obviously, the University of Pittsburgh, for me, do they stay in the ACC? The Big 12 has always been an option. Or does ESPN execute this option? It goes till 2036, and more than likely, the ACC stays together. That's another option. But this is going to be interesting to continue to watch on a day-to-day basis. Now, again, guys, let me know your thoughts. What do you think is going to happen to the ACC? What do you think of the ESPN option? Do you think that's crazy? Do you think they're going to execute it or not? Again, subscribe to the channel down below. Subscribe, like, share with your friends. The comment section's always great. Let me hear your thoughts. But more importantly, subscribe to the channel. Again, continue to log on here and continue to watch the show as we continue to talk about the ACC, but more importantly, the offseason when it comes to the ACC and all your ACC news. Guys, as always, thank you for viewing. And of course, go to Pitt. I'll see you next time.